Hello, welcome to the Objective Epistemology podcast. In this episode, I will be musing over the Gnostic cult religion of critical climate Marxism. I clearly remember the day I went with my parents to an independent theater in San Diego. No, more specifically, it was an independent theater in Hillcrest, for those of you who understand why this detail is relevant to these discussions. This was way back in the month of May in the year 2006. I was 27 years old. We paid to watch the man-bear-pig proselytize himself on stage for what I now understand to be the Gnostic cult religion of critical climate Marxism. During this time, the cult was known by its original name of global warming. I recall listening to the man-bear-pig make predictions and threats of mass destruction and death in the form of global catastrophic warming events. It was implied that humans were the root cause. He promised unprecedented destruction and disaster, and in particular, events that would raise the ocean level, disrupt and displace everyone living near the coastlines. It was akin to the scene from the Ghostbusters, when Peter Venkman said, "The city is headed for a disaster of biblical proportions." And the mayor, "What do you mean biblical?" And then Ray said, "What he means is Old Testament, Mr. Mayor. Real wrath of God stuff." Peter, "Exactly." Ray, "Fire, brimstone coming down from the skies, rivers and seas boiling." Spangler, 40 years of darkness, earthquakes, volcanoes." Winston, "The dead rising from the grave." Peter, "Human sacrifice, dogs and cats living together, mass hysteria." Nearly 20 years have passed, and the members of the climate cult have once again moved the goalposts. They have renamed their pseudo-prophetic Gnostic cult religion to continue fear-mongering to the new audience since their predictions were plain wrong. They renamed it climate change, sometimes even climate justice. Not unlike the Heaven's Gate cult, they continue to claim that end times are close, but not here yet, and, in the Gnostic cult tradition, they claim we are trapped and imprisoned on Earth, and they have the secret special knowledge of how to fix it all the problems, because they have reached that enlightenment stage of critical consciousness, that Gnostic nirvana, and so the critical climate dialectic progresses. It's a little more complicated than that, but that's the gist of it. Doesn't this sound like the ultimate grift, the power grab for dominance? Sure does to me. With cult members like Greta Thunberg being groomed into leadership roles for the climate dictatorship of our proletariat, what the fuck could possibly go wrong? If it's not completely transparent yet, these cult members give no fucks about the climate. They only desire power to rule you by force. And so they use the grift of climate crisis as a club to beat you into submission. Not because they care about biodiversity, and not because they value speciation, but because they know this topic has weight because of objective epistemology that they dread but use to their advantage. And so they use the fear of climate crisis as an intellectual bludgeon to further their dialectical agenda. If you haven't realized this yet, then you haven't been paying attention. What the critical climate Marxists want is to eat steak and lobster, drive supercars, sail super yachts, and flit around the globe in private jets, telling the backwards plebs of the world how to live their insignificant and meaningless lives. They want the plebs to eat the bugs and live in the pods, so they can eat and live the life of opulence. Like modern-day royals, these cultists use words to form psycho-incantational spells to make you believe they know more about reality than they actually do. This is how the Gnostic dialectic progresses. They fool you into thinking that reasonable modes of production are evil, that free market capitalism is evil, while at the same time, they strike to take over the means of productions for themselves. These fleshed wastes don't produce anything, yet appropriate everything through incantation. And if they become powerful enough, they will appropriate everything through the initiation of force. Take a look at every civilization throughout history that attempted the utopian nightmare of communism. It always ended the same, in mass death, destruction, and starvation through lies and violence. And the Gnostic dialectic progresses. These individuals use words as spells to take what they want. I like to think of them as word wizards, speaking incantations from the postmodern Gnostic religious miasma of critical Marxism. I can't restate this enough. They pretend to know things they couldn't possibly know, and they draw a crowd of individuals into their fetid and feral mindset, void of sound principles, void of reasonable and objective epistemology, and void of practical and theoretical knowledge of the value of free market capitalism ideals. They hate capitalism because it puts a lie to their Gnostic wizardry. and shines a light so bright on their lies that even the most brainwashed cultists see a moment of clarity. It's just like the quote from John Galt's speech. They proclaim that every man born is entitled to exist without labor, and the laws of reality, to the contrary, notwithstanding, is entitled to receive his minimum substance, his food, his clothes, his shelter, with no effort on his part, as due and his birthright. To receive it from who? Blank out. Every man, they announce, owns an equal share of the technological benefits created in the world. Created by who? Blank out. Frantic cowards who posture as defenders of industrialists now define the purpose of economics as an adjustment between the unlimited desires of men and the goods supplied in limited quantity. Supplied by who? Blank out. Intellectual hoodlums who pose as professors shrug away the thinkers of the past by declaring that their social theories were based on impractical assumptions, that man was a rational being, but since men are not rational, they declare, there ought to be established a system that will make it possible for them to exist while being irrational, which means while defying reality. Who will make it possible? Blank out. Any stray mediocrity rushes into print with plans to control the production of mankind, and whoever agrees or disagrees with his statistics, no one questions his right to enforce his plans by means of a gun. Enforce on whom? Blank out. Random females with causeless incomes Twitter on trips around the globe and return to deliver the message that the backwards people of the world demand a higher standard of living. Demand of who? Blank out. Before I go into the weeds here, let me strictly clarify that I'm in no favor of mucking up the environment for fuck's sake or shits and giggles. I'm completely not interested in the idea that humans are the chosen organism on Earth by some arbitrary god they made up to explain things out of their technological grasp, control, or understanding. The floating abstraction they claim as the concept of God is a contradiction in terms. They claim God with an identity of being all-knowing, omniscient, or powerful, omnipotent, everywhere at once, or omnipresent, and all-loving, omnibenevolent. This God could never exist in objective reality, the reality we all live in. All these fundamental attributes are a contradiction in term. For example, a God cannot be all-loving and also create humans that God knows will become atheist. And in turn, because these humans reject the existence of God, God then condemns them to eternity in hell. Either God is not all-knowing, or God is an asshole and not all-loving. God is omnipresent, or everywhere at all times. What kind of God chooses to stay hidden and stands by while the virtuous are victimized by the evil? Either God is not omnipresent, or God is an asshole. A God cannot claim to be all-powerful. If a God cannot create a rock that is too large or too heavy for God to move, it contradicts its nature of being all-powerful. If a God can produce a rock too large or too heavy for God to move, then God is not all-powerful and not God. So God is a floating abstraction and a contradiction in terms. And terms are the essence of our ability to think rationally about reality. Terms must be identified and defined. Without proper definitions, words are meaningless. Concepts are meaningless. Talking to you, Paul Thagard. Well, anyway. I'm hyper-aware that 99.9% of all species on Earth have gone extinct, and that in general, humans are not helping at this time in our evolution, and are greatly exacerbating the destruction of natural environments. Though, through the advancement of technology, I have reason to think that humans can become net zero and a net positive in the future. I'm aware that Earth depends on the diversity of evolutionary development of terracentric speciation to maintain a fragile and idiosyncratic biogenesis needed to sustain our terrestrial ecosphere. Humans do not, and will likely never have, the technology needed to manage complex systems on this scale. Humans are humans, and not omniscient. Just as humans will never have the conceptual ability to manage complex international or national economies successfully, at best, humans can use technology to mitigate their impact on the environment. No individual or group of individuals can know what is best for another individual organism once it reaches maturation, and pretending to do so is a wizardly task that only sociopaths can argue into an apathetic fertility. Let's take a listen to what NASA has to say about the methods they use for data collection, Try to remember that, when collected properly, data should be objective and unbiased, or just the facts, ma'am. The problem isn't with properly obtained data. The problem arises when data is interpreted. If data is objectively interpreted, that is science. If data is interpreted to fit a particular conclusion or narrative, to further a particular ideological agenda, that is the opposite of science. Job of science is not to prove things are true, quite the opposite. Job of science is to utilize the scientific method to find the things that are false. The things that science cannot disprove often become candidates for what we eventually come to know as objective truth. I'm not saying NASA is always biased, but I'm also not saying that NASA is always objective either. NASA's standards change depending on who's in charge. NASA states this: what kinds of data do scientists use to study climate? Now, if I were a NASA employee writing this, I would have written this question differently. I would have asked, what kind of data or evidence can scientists discover that disproves the worries about climate change? It's a given that the climate on Earth is always in fluctuation. And it's a given that all entities living on Earth have and always will play a role in a greater or lesser degree of influence on the change of our ecosphere. The real question isn't how do we stop climate change, but have we discovered enough data or evidence to disprove the mindset that climate change isn't just a normal part of the cyclical patterns the Earth goes through, and therefore we should be attempting to stop it or tamper with it? Keep this in mind for later. What are the macro cycles of Earth, of our Sun, of our galaxy, and how do all of these cycles impact how the climate changes on Earth? Okay, back to NASA. Climate researchers use every possible direct and indirect measurement to study the full history of Earth's climate, from the latest satellite observations to samples of prehistoric ice extracted from glaciers. When they focus on changes of the past 100 to 150 years, they are observations made by modern scientific instruments. Although the mercury thermometer and barometer were both invented in the 1700s, they and other modern instruments were not widely used for weather observation till much later. In the United States, most weather stations were established in the late 1800s. When scientists focus on climate from before the past 100 to 150 years, they use records from physical, chemical, and biological materials preserved within the geological record. Organisms such as diatoms, forams, and coral can serve as useful climate proxies. Other proxies include ice cores, tree rings, and sediment cores. Chemical proxy records include isotope ratios, elemental analysis, biomarkers, and biogenic silica. Taken together, these proxies extend our knowledge of past climate back hundreds of millions of years into the past. Let's recap their data with some numbers, for example. The oldest mercury thermometer and barometer date is about 150 years ago. The oldest coral data is about 4,000 years ago. The oldest tree ring data is about 14,000 years ago. The oldest biogenic silica is about 400,000 years ago. The oldest ice core samples are about 3 million years old. The oldest sediment core data is about 56 million years old. The oldest diatom data is from the Jurassic period and is about 150 to 200 million years old. The oldest foraminifera are from the Cambrian and about 500 million years old. Now let's take a moment to think about a few more numbers. Don't worry, I think most of you will already be familiar with a few of them. There are about 365 days in a year. This means that Earth rotates in a complete rotation about 365 times for every orbit around the Sun. Within this time frame, humans experience 4 distinct climate change cyclical sequences. We have given them the name summer, fall, winter, and spring. Because of the angle of Earth's rotation and the position or number of Earth rotations in the orbital cycle around our Sun, these seasons are experienced in opposite depending if you are in the northern or southern hemisphere. Remember, hemispheres are the top or bottom half of the ball we call Earth. Now that we remember the numbers for Earth, and we reconsider the complexities of the slight tilt to Earth's rotation, let's think about this. If we were to think about our Sun's orbit like we think about Earth's orbit, what does our Sun orbit around? I know, probably been a while since you have thought about this, but let's think about why this is important. From today's discoveries, we have used our high-tech equipment to gaze into the center of our Milky Way galaxy, and from the data we have accumulated, we can disprove the existence of almost everything except a supermassive black hole at the center. So, A black hole is a lot of things, but for our needs to know for this thought experiment, it has a very large gravitational well that we imagine like a pull of a magnet to our metal fridge. Our sun also has a similar but lesser pull that keeps Earth orbiting around it. So our sun has just enough pull to keep Earth circling the sun and not getting pulled towards the supermassive black hole at the center of the universe. Remember, our sun also has an orbit. It orbits around the supermassive black hole at the center of our Milky Way galaxy. If you're tracking with me, this means that just as the Earth takes 365 days to circle or orbit our sun also has a type of year called a galactic year. This is where I will ask you to remember back to the data NASA has been collecting and the timeline I pointed out. The oldest data on the list is about 500 million years old. This has nothing to do with the quality of each of the data types, only with the quantity or the amount of data collected over a given time frame. Now the question is, how long is a galactic year, and why would this number impact our expectations about the amount of data NASA has collected and is now using to calculate if the climate change we are experiencing on Earth today is a relatively normal deviation or a climate crisis like the mean little members of the cult religion of Gnostic critical climate change Marxism are attempting to use as a club to beat you into submission so they can seize the power to dictate how you live your life. I hope you're listening to me, Greta Thunberg and others. I'm thinking of your desire to become the leaders in the climate cult dictatorship takeover of the proletariat. Our sun's galactic year is about 230 million years, and one galactic day is about 634,000 Earth days. So that means 1,736 Earth years are equal to one galactic day. If you're continuing to track with me and you're not only remembering the list of different data points NASA has collected as evidence, you should now be thinking about how long they have been collecting this data, and in perspective to the galactic year, how relevant this data is in determining if our climate is actually much different today as it was the same day 230 million years ago, 460 million years ago, and 690 million years ago. Wait, NASA's data maxes out at about 500 million years ago. That's just about 2 galactic years. Are you beginning to understand my skepticism with the amount of quantitative or the quantity of data NASA has collected? Not how much of any particular day, but how much data over the duration of time. What would you think if you were told that the experts knew that there was a climate change catastrophe happening now and presented you only with 2.5 years of data collected? NASA has just over 2 galactic years of climate data for Earth's galactic orbit. Think about it. These same scientists say that it's impossible to make predictions about a climate catastrophe with just the data consisting of climate events in a single year. They also say that if there is an exceptionally devastating hurricane or climate event, that particular event is just one data point and is not a predictor of future catastrophic climate change in and of itself. They continue to say that this data must be collected over a considerable amount of time, even millennia, to be considered important to making predictions. Is 1,000 Earth years of data enough, or are we missing the larger picture here? Yet, that would only be accurate if our solar system, just Earth and the other planets circling or orbiting the sun, were in a closed system, all by itself, and static in space and time. Yet we know for a fact that our solar system is only one dynamic microsystem in a much larger macrodynamic system, interacting with more than 100 billion dynamic solar systems like ours that make up the totality of the Milky Way galaxy. It would be like looking at a single gear in an automatic wristwatch and pretending to know what time it is. This, in and of itself, would be concerning, but for someone claiming to know the time from that observation, while at the same time say that because they know the time, they also know that it's time for a major catastrophe unless you relinquish all power to them and allow them to dictate every aspect of your life. Let's wrap this up while considering the time frame for most of NASA's data. Comparing Earth's year with a galactic year, while also considering Earth's seasons to galactic seasons, what galactic season is Earth experiencing right now? For all I know, we could just be starting to come out of our galactic winter and entering spring. So remember, the oldest mercury thermometer and barometer data is about 150 years old. The mercury thermometer and barometer are ridiculously less than 0.00001 of a galactic second old if galactic seconds were equal to Earth seconds. The oldest coral data is about 4,000 years old. The coral data is considerably less than 1 galactic second old if galactic seconds were equal to Earth seconds. The oldest tree ring data is about 14,000 years old. The tree ring data is considerably less than 1 galactic second of data if galactic seconds were equal to Earth seconds. The oldest biogenic silica is about 400,000 years old. The biogenic silica data is about 0.001 of a galactic year of data if galactic years were equal to Earth years. The oldest ice core samples are about 3 million years old. The ice core samples are about 0.01 of a galactic year of data if galactic years were equal to Earth years. The oldest sediment core data is about 56 million years old. The oldest sediment core data is about 0.3 of a galactic year if galactic years were equal to Earth years. The oldest diatom data is from the Jurassic period, and it is about 150 to 200 million years old. Diatom data is about 0.86 of a galactic year if galactic years were equal to Earth years. The oldest foraminifera are from the Cambrian and are about 500 million years old. The foraminifera data is just over 2 galactic years of data if galactic years were equal to Earth years. When you discover an objective epistemology, and you choose to practice this method of discovering knowledge, what I have just outlined should give you pause and a reason for thought and contemplation. I can find no objective evidence to justify the destruction of the environment on Earth, but at the same time, I don't know any rational individual that enjoys living in a polluted, toxic shithole, though this doesn't mean I agree with the cult of critical climate Marxism. Quite the contrary. Humans need to use paper as a means to a paperless and digital society, just as humans need fossil fuels as a means to a society run on a more efficient form of energy. You can't demand discovery, and if you try to ban the stepping stones impunitivity for not discovering the end goal of more efficient energy, you miss the principle of progress and innovation. Capitalism will meet our energy needs when the time is right. I recognize that there is ample evidence that governments cannot plan economies or save the environment. Personally, I despise the idea that manufacturers choose to manufacture cheap trash items for a throwaway society. It makes me anxious to consider that the majority of these trash items will make their way to landfills, inevitably into the oceans of the world. I don't look forward every day to wondering if I'm drinking and eating microplastics. I wonder what the long-term consequences will be as I age, though I have yet to find objective evidence to disprove the proper usage of nuclear energy as a clean and reliable energy source. I have found ample evidence that solar, wind, and lithium batteries are going to be a toxic nightmare in the future when these items succumb to their limited life cycles and need to be dismantled and recycled. Granted, I have reason to think that new and innovative technology will continue to advance and humans will discover solutions to the majority of the problems humans are concerned with today. It cannot hurt to strive to live an objectively reasonable green lifestyle, but by educated choice and not by the edicts of mean little communist dystopians, dictatorship that demands that you live in a pod, drink your own piss, and eat the fucking bugs. I hate that idea. You will own nothing and you will be happy. Private property rights are the method of teaching individuals to value and maintain nice things. This was the easiest part of taking this argument apart. The next stage is to look at the quality of the data instead of the quantity. In a future episode of the Objective Epistemology podcast, I would like to dive into the other side of this inquiry. I'm not convinced that climate change isn't worrisome. I'm just convinced that there isn't enough data to make a prediction at this time in human history. Thank you for listening. This has been the Objectivist Epistemology podcast. Have a good day, and I'll see you in the next one.